Greetings, everybody. That was fun. Do you have anything to say? It's as exciting as that? No,
Nope.
we're going to get. We were at a dinner last night, Greg and I, with some other people, and I sort of started it off asking sort of what big technologies are coming down the road. And if you don't know, United Technologies was actually one of the companies that was born out of Boeing nearly 100 years ago, or 100 years ago. And in the process, you do elevators, you make engines, and compressors and cooling systems, and you gave a synopsis of technology coming down the road that I thought that made elevators more exciting than I could have ever imagined. So, what kinds of disruptive technologies do you think are both necessary and that you think will be with us in 2030? How will you transform our elevator experience?
Well, if you think about a modern elevator, it really hasn't changed much since Elijah Graves Otis invented the safety elevator in 1854. He unveiled it at the New York World's Fair. Essentially, it's a rope or a cable that pulls a cab up a hoistway. And the aesthetics are different, the electronics are different today, but the basic mechanical structure of an elevator has really been unchanged in let's call it 165 years. As we think about the tall buildings that are going up today, and I don't mean 600-meter buildings, I'm talking about 1,800-meter tall buildings. Think about that, a mile in the air, more than a mile in the air. The idea of actually putting an elevator with cables to pull up a cab and a hoistway becomes impractical because the weight of the cables is such that you could never get a machine big enough to actually pull the cables and the cab up the hoistway. And so you have to think about propulsion in an elevator very differently. And so what we've started to experiment with is how do you use electromagnetics in a hoistway to drive an elevator up and down a shaft. And if you think about maybe Star Trek back in the 70s, the idea of having these things that moved up and down in these small hoistways with electromagnetics, it's the same concept. Now, it's ridiculously expensive today to do it. But as we think about where the world is going from a growth perspective, how the cities will continue to grow, or the urban population, we're adding something like 65 million people a year to the urban population, you're going to need to have taller and taller buildings. And so we're 600 meters today, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai may be the tallest building. I think as we think about 20 years from now, you'll think about buildings that are 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters, 1,800 meters. And so we had to think about how we're going to build elevators, not just build them, but how you're going to service them.
Because otherwise we're going to have to walk up a lot of stairs.
That's a lot of stairs.
And we also talked last night about compressors and how jet engines, it's always ranked as the most important transformative technology of the last century. You said that's going by the wayside too. So what's happening to jet engines? What's happening to compressors?
So jet engines have been in commercial service since the late 1950s. If you talk to the folks at Pratt & Whitney, and Pratt was actually founded by Fred Rentschler about the same time that William Boeing founded the Boeing company, because the fact of the matter is an airplane is a tube that doesn't do anything without the engines on it. So the Pratt guys would tell you they're the most important system on an aircraft, but that's just Pratt. The fact of the matter is you think about the technology of a jet engine, it's been around really since the 30s, as I said, introduced to commercial service in the 50s. And it's a pretty simple concept. You have a large fan in the front of an engine, which turns about 24,000 RPMs. That pulls air into a compressor. The compressor obviously compresses the air at a ratio of, 20-30 to 1. That compressed air gets ignited. That hot gas, 4,000 degrees F, goes back and drives a turbine. That turbine spins, and the thrust comes out the back. Pretty simple if you're an aerospace engineer. I'm an accountant. I just talk about it. So if you think about innovation, the idea came to Pratt that, if you think about these big turbofan engines, the front of those, the big fans, actually want to turn a lot slower than the turbomachinery. Turbomachinery is best at somewhere around 24,000 to 28,000 RPMs. The fan in front should spin at about a third of that speed for optimal efficiency. So for the last 10 years, we've been working on something called the geared turbofan, which essentially is a reduction gear at the front of the engine, which allows the large fan in front to spin at a third of the speed of the turbomachinery. It's just gone into commercial service. It cost us $10 billion to develop.
Wow.
And it's an amazing...
I understood that part.
It's an amazing invention. It saves about 16% on fuel burn. It saves about 50% on particulate emissions. and it saves about 75% on noise. So you think about it, you can be at an airport now and not have to hear the jets screaming overhead with these GTFs. And they're in service today and they work. So that's great. I mean, this is the technology for the next 20 years. What Steve and I were talking about is what happens next. And I think what you'll see, I think Marion had a big picture of it up here, you won't see jet engines used for propulsion. You will see electrically actuated, electrically driven propellers that drive an aircraft powered by stored energy, be it batteries, be it onboard electric generating systems, but it will be very different. And so all this work that we've been doing for the last 60 years on jet engines, we have to think about what do we do next. And that's really the challenge of all of these businesses. How do you think about putting yourself out of business?
Now, that's a profound statement. How do you think about putting yourself out of the business? And I know that part of what we're talking about here is disruption. Part of it is, when does disruption become anarchy or become lethal? And, as someone who's sort of a captain of industry type person, Dennis Muhlenberg, the CEO of Boeing, said last night that when Boeing became part of the Dow 30, I think in 1987, 13 of the firms are now gone. Right. Or have been, absorbed into other places. What do you think the blind spots are that big firms today, at a time when we have the internet of everything coming, we have sustainability challenge and climate change coming, what do you think the blind spots are? Let's not say your blind spots, but your biggest competitor's blind spot, say GE's.
Well, I won't pick on the General Electric company, but I would say I think the biggest problem that most companies in the U.S. have especially is the pressure on short-term earnings. And so the thought of investing in a technology that's 20 years out, it's counterintuitive to someone who worries about how you're going to grow earnings quarter to quarter to quarter. And I think it's this focus on short-termism in corporate America, driven by activists and stocks, driven by investors who want returns quarter after quarter, driven by money managers who are looking for outperformance every quarter. It drives companies to make very, very short-term decisions and have a very short-term focus. I'm fortunate at United Technologies. We have 4 global businesses. We have the Otis Elevator business, Pratt & Whitney, have an aerospace systems business, and we have the carrier and fire and security business. Each one of those is about $15 billion. Each one is global. And each one makes products that you service forever and ever.
No kidding. Tell them about your oldest elevator.
I'll tell you, if you think about an elevator, a lowly elevator, we service about 1.9 million of these elevators around the world every day. We move the Earth's population every 3 days on Otis equipment. I mean, a phenomenal scale, right? So the beauty of the business is more than half of the revenue comes from servicing the elevators. Jet engines, it's the same thing. You've got a 35-year life cycle on a jet engine, on an aircraft system. Even an air conditioner, it might last 15 or 20 years, and you're going to service it that whole time. So about 45% of our revenues actually come from the aftermarket, which allows us to take kind of a longer view of things, and so not be worried so much about the disruptive technology of tomorrow, and allows us to look forward. I was talking to Steve last night. My favorite Otis elevator is actually in the St. Regis Hotel in New York, and not to do a commercial for the St. Regis, but it's a lovely old hotel, and the elevator, an Otis elevator, has been in that hotel since the late 1890s. If you go into the elevator, what you'll see on the floor of each of the 4 elevators is a gold Otis globe, barely recognizable because it's been worn down by over 100 years of use. But the elevator is still an Otis elevator that we've serviced the entire time. That's the beauty of the business, right? We have long cycle businesses, and we can think about things in a longer term perspective than many others. We're not Facebook, we're not Google, we're not changing the world, but the world's not changing every second on us either.
When you think about the next 20 or 30 years, and one of the discussions that the Atlantic has been involved in is the future of cities, and you begin thinking about urbanization that's going on not only in the United States, but really all around the world, and how every instrument out there is going to be talking and communicating to every other instrument, benches and doorways, and a lot of data out there. And I'm interested, because you do make this infrastructure, a lot of it. Yeah. Are you with it, or are you behind the curve? How do you sort of look at this future of cities formula and place the bets about where you are in these transitions that positions you well as opposed to not?
So if you think about what's happening with the urban population, by 2030, 70% of the world's population will be urbanized. It'll be 650 cities of over 1 million people, half of which you've never heard of because they're in China. But all of them will require very large buildings to house the population. And those big buildings, of course, is our business, right? We do the elevators, we do the air conditioning, we do the building control system. If you think about buildings today across the globe, about 40% of global energy consumption comes from buildings. 40%, right? Big number. Just by installing a new Carrier chiller in your facility, you can reduce your energy footprint from a 30-year-old chiller to today by about 70%. Think about that. So sustainability is obviously going to be the key because, as we know, as populations grow, as energy costs continue to rise, sustainability will be the mantra as we go forward because these big buildings are going to be supporting large populations, and it's beyond just what we do in buildings. It's what you do in infrastructure, what you do with the water systems, all of the other scarce resources. Eventually, it all gets connected into a building.
Are there good models of this? I was recently with Energy Secretary Moniz in Washington State. I don't know if anybody's from Seattle, but there's a building there called the Bullitt Building. And if you don't know about it, if you're interested in the subject, look it up. But the Bullitt Building is a living building, and all of this waste systems, water systems, the temperature, there's sort of this thinking brain that kind of can figure out how to maneuver air and heat, and it apparently has reduced energy consumption of building about 95%.
Right.
And they talk about going to existing large structures, and that if they go through this retrofit, can get the power usage down by 70-75%. Right. Are you familiar with that movement?
We are. So this is all the whole LEED initiative, where you have a LEED Platinum, which is the ultimate in energy efficiency in a building. Very few buildings want to go through the cost to become LEED Platinum, but LEED Gold will get you 85% of the way there. If you think about it, in the U.S., 20 years ago, only 2% of the buildings worried about conservation or LEED status. Today, more than 47% of all new buildings are looking for ways to get to a LEED Gold or LEED Platinum. We have a facility in Shanghai that we built several years ago to do overhauls of engines with China Eastern Airlines. That's a gold, or it's a LEED Platinum building. Every bit of water is recycled from the rainwater that comes in, which is used to run the toilets, from all the water that's used in the shop floor, it's all reclaimed. Energy efficiency with all of the solar panels, about 95% energy free compared to an existing building. So it's out there. The cost is high today, but not cost prohibitive if you think about energy costs continuing to rise.
One of the other things that came up last night, but also here today, is the workforce pipeline and how you, as we're evolving, and it seem to be technologically evolving faster and faster and faster, and we have automation, and we have stuff that's just very clearly at least impacting some folks in jobs and moving. There's a debate on whether other miraculous jobs pop up somewhere that they're naturally designed for. But how do you think about this? I mean, how do you think about not only your own workforce and what you want to expect from them, but what are our responsibilities collectively to those people that become displaced by these technological revolutions?
Steve, it's a great question. And again, just to put it in perspective, we've got about 200,000 employees at UTC, about 70,000 here in the U.S. For those of you that have been following the presidential politics, you'll notice that Mr. Trump has been picking on the Carrier Corporation for trying to move 1,400 jobs from Indianapolis to Mexico. We're a little bit behind because most of the competition's already moved to Mexico, but those 1,400 jobs that are going to be eliminated in Indianapolis are real people and real jobs. They have real lives, and we have, as a company, a real responsibility to those employees. And I think the idea of retraining employees is not new. About 20 years ago, United Technologies under George David established what we call the Employee Scholar Program. George recognized the impact of globalization. He saw what was happening in the aerospace. He saw it happening in our commercial businesses, and he put in place a program where we would offer a free college education to any UTC employee in any degree they wish to pursue at no cost to them. Any employee that was impacted by outsourcing, we guaranteed them a 4-year education after their job was gone. So we've given out our people have earned 38,000 degrees in the last 20 years. We've spent $1.2 billion on this program. And I think it's a model of what the responsibility is that corporate America has to help retrain workers. Now, to be fair, if you're 50 years old and you're building heating coils in Indianapolis, Do you want to go back and spend 4 years at Indiana University to earn a degree in accounting? Probably not.
Say a big no on that.
It's a big no.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we don't have an obligation to train them to do other things, other skills. So the Employee Scholar Program has been expanded to include vocational training.
Right.
You want to learn to be a welder. You want to learn to be an electrician. Whatever it is, our whole goal is to give people the ability to continue to expand their own personal skill sets. Even if we can't guarantee lifetime employment, we can encourage lifetime learning. And that's really the whole genesis of the program. And I would say that most of corporate America has yet to embrace this, but I think it's an imperative as we think of globalization. That genie's out of the bottle. We have to think about how do we train the next generation, and how do we retrain the current generation of workers.
When you sit, I'm always just in the kind of like these super people CEOs, like sit like a Wizard of Oz, and you see 200,000 workers out there. What excites you? What excites you and what depresses you, other than bad earnings?
Well, there's no yellow brick road, so that's kind of depressing. And I wish there was a curtain I could hide behind many days.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting.
That's a tweetable line right there.
It's what's most encouraging to me. The best time I have in this job is when I get out to see employees working in the field and understand what they're doing. And we travel around the world. I think we've gone to 30 countries in the last 18 months or so, and we have the opportunity to meet with the local people running the businesses, be it air conditioning business or a fire security business or an aircraft overhaul business. And it is amazing the shiny eyes that you see when you can get down to the people that are actually running businesses and making decisions on a day-to-day basis. When you have a 200,000 person organization, you don't really make a heck of a lot of decisions on a daily basis. Maybe what time to come to work and what time to go home, what's for dinner, okay. And even that's not always in my control. But the fact is, we have a very decentralized business. Right? Hundreds of individual P&Ls around the world. Otis, as an example, has about 1,800 branch offices around the world. Each one of those branch offices with a general manager who has full P&L responsibility, who has full decision-making authority over how to price his product, how to service his product, how to install his product. Now, we do some things at the top in terms of training and standards and quality. But when you go down to these branch offices and you have a discussion with the general manager, he can tell you exactly what's going on in Los Angeles or here in Chicago or here in New York, or in Shanghai, or in Hangzhou, or in Singapore. It's amazing to see the bright, shiny eyes of these people that are actually get to make the decisions, and it's empowering people that's the best part of this job.
And is part of that shiny eye process being able to innovate and change? Because when you look at the U.S. government, to be honest, most jobs run on inertia. What they did yesterday defines what they do tomorrow, and that's just the way it is. How do you take an enterprise of your scale and give people the green light to change something?
Well, that empowerment actually comes, we have an operating system that every one of our employees is well versed in. We call it the Achieving Competitive Excellence. And that's a nice acronym. It was actually something about continuous improvement. But what it really is how do you delight the customer every single day? And that is the mantra of what we do most at UTC is how do you make sure that the guy whose elevator you're servicing is going to be happy about what you're doing? How do you make sure that the guy operating his engines in India is happy every day, that the pilots at the airline's operating? And the ability to use process control, to use continuous improvement, to do relentless root cause analysis when you make a mistake, to get a continuous loop of feedback from the customer, all that's part of the process of how we run UTC. So if I go to a factory in Shanghai, or if I go to a factory in Xi'an, France, or in Prague, everybody uses the same metrics. Everybody speaks the same language about how do you delight customers. And I think it's that singular process that unites UTC and gives us the ability to continually figure out how do you reduce costs, how do you continue to innovate, what does the customer want? And I think that voice of the customer is the most critical part of this.
We're right near the end, but I want to ask you about this one guy that I know from UTC, and you and I have talked. I think his name is John Mandick. I may have it wrong.
John Mandick.
But he's if anyone was more obsessively, compulsively wrapped around sustainability, I've never met anyone. And the fact that he works inside your company must be both a great thing and a major headache. So how do you, just 30 seconds on John, but also on how, when you talk about all these P&Ls independent, how does someone like John sort of let loose and help take your company down? Because you spend any time, let me guarantee you'll walk out a transformed person in the way you think about waste.
Look, John Mandick is an evangelist for sustainability.
And you pay him money.
We actually pay him to come to work.
Yeah.
And his whole mission in life is to point out areas where we can improve the life, the human condition, if you will, throughout the world with our products. And it's a big goal. John's got a big job, but he's got a big brain, and he thinks about this continuously. He actually wrote a book called Food Foolish, talking about the food chain and how the fact that 50% of food is wasted from the time it gets to the farm to the fork. And what can we do as a society to improve food waste? We make enough food, produce enough food for 9 billion people, and yet a third of the world's population goes to bed hungry every night. How can we, using our products, our refrigerated transport products, our elevators, our other transportation products, how can we improve that cold chain such that nobody goes to bed hungry? It's a noble goal. We won't solve it by ourselves, but I think having someone like John to put the spotlight on it and to challenge people, whether it's jet engine design or whether it's elevator design or air conditioning design, how are you going to do that in a more sustainable fashion every single day?
And finally, as we walk off stage, because I don't want people to feel that you were deceptive in how you dress, tell people how you dress at work.
Well, I do not wear a tie, and occasionally I don't wear socks, but because we're on stage today, I had to keep the socks on. But we did.
With that, I just want to say, great mind. Thanks, Gregory Hayes. Thank you very much.